This is Censor Studio with Sangsewi Biak. Protests in Nepal are spreading quickly. Police-protester clashes turned violent, with police firing and causing at least 19 deaths and over 100 injuries. Let's take a look at the ongoing protests in Nepal as of today. The Communist Party of Nepal, which follows Marxist-Leninist ideology, is currently in power and is known for poor governance. The Communist Party of Nepal suddenly blocked major social media platforms like YouTube and Facebook. Protests against the Nepalese government have been frequent in Nepal for some time. I'll explain more later. On September 6th, the Nepalese government ordered the Telecommunications Association to block access to unregistered social media platforms. There were a total of 26 social networking services platforms. Social media platforms are also at fault for not registering. Things were fine until they suddenly blocked social networking services. As a result, there was great confusion in Nepal. The Nepalese government insists on following the law, while the opposition protests, claiming it restricts press freedom. That's understandable, since in early 2025, massive anti-government protests spread in Nepal largely due to social media. So, many people assume that the Nepalese government blocked social media to prevent the spread of these protests. The Nepalese government explained that the reason for blocking social media was to crack down on the spread of fake news and the increase in hate speech. It was obvious that they did this to stop the criticism against themselves that started on social media. When the Nepalese government openly suppressed the people's freedom like this, the citizens' anger grew uncontrollably, and once again they poured out into the streets. Anti-government protests broke out simultaneously not only in the capital, Kathmandu, but also in several other cities across the country. The main point of this protest was not a demand to lift the social networking services ban. Protesters chanted against decades of corruption, insisting social media wasn't to blame and openly criticizing the government's corruption and authoritarianism. Citizens who took to the streets raised their voices while waving the Nepalese flag. At first, it started as a peaceful march, but soon the atmosphere became uncontrollably intense. Some protesters tried to force their way past the police barricades and enter the parliament building. During the clash, police cars and ambulances were attacked, and flames were later seen rising. The city quickly descended into chaos, and as things escalated, the police stood their ground. Tear gas grenades were fired one after another to disperse the protesters, and water cannons were unleashed. Rubber bullets flew from the sky, throwing the streets into chaos. Citizens covered their faces with masks and scarves as they threw stones. Police advanced with shields, causing a tense standoff. The center of Kathmandu was so covered in tear gas that it was hard even to breathe, and cries and ambulance sirens mixed together everywhere. Ultimately, the government lost control and imposed a citywide curfew. As night fell, the streets quickly grew silent, but the arrival of military forces soon brought a heavy tension. When rifle-armed soldiers surrounded parliament and government buildings, citizens grew even more enraged. It was clear the government used force over dialogue to suppress people. Notably, the participants' age range stood out. Many protesters were people in their 20s new to society, and some students in school uniforms also joined the demonstrations. That's why people use the term Generation Z protests. This generation, raised with smartphones and social media, assumes free expression and participation are normal. When the government tried to silence them, they took the lead and fought back. A local reporter said his heart ached seeing children in school uniforms fleeing tear gas. But the problem started right at that moment. Regardless of how peaceful or intense the protests were, Nepalese police ultimately fired guns at citizens who kept protesting. Perhaps deciding that tear gas and water cannons were no longer enough to control the crowd, they started firing real bullets. When gunshots erupted in the street, the crowd panicked and chaos followed. At least 10 people lost their lives in this shooting. Most of those who were shot and fell were young people, and there were even students among them. More than 100 injured people were taken to the hospital. Many of them were in critical condition after being shot or hit by grenade fragments. The problem was not limited to Kathmandu. Many people died in provincial cities during violent police crackdowns. Across Nepal, places quickly became battlefields. Citizens' anger intensified, and chants demanding the guns' withdrawal echoed in the streets. The international community also spoke out, with the United Nations officially expressing concern over the Nepalese government's use of firearms. The Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights stated that the use of live ammunition can never be justified. The government must show maximum restraint immediately, as Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch jointly condemned this as a serious human rights violation, not just suppression of protests. The situation escalated nationwide as protests that began in Kathmandu spread to major cities. Police and citizens clashed in several areas, with barricades and flames rising. The The curfew and deployment of military forces only made the citizens more aware, and now all of Nepal had become not just a protest site, but a massive powder keg that could explode at any moment. As the protests grew too large, the Nepalese government hurriedly began to lift the restrictions on social media. Khadga Prasad Sharma Oli, Nepal's prime minister, said the violence during the protests was due to infiltration by selfish groups. He announced that a committee of inquiry would be formed within 15 days to determine the cause of the incident, assess the damage, and come up with measures to prevent such incidents from happening again in the future. After this announcement, the social media restrictions were completely lifted. However, the protests likely won't end now, especially since, unlike before, protesters have died from police gunfire. Khadga Prasad Sharma Oli, Nepal's prime minister, further angered protesters by suggesting someone was secretly behind the demonstrations. Additionally, these protests weren't caused by social media blocks. Blocking social media was just a trigger, as protests over dissatisfaction with the Nepalese government were already happening. It just got bigger this time. In fact, Nepal's political turmoil is not something that started yesterday or today. In 2008, Nepal ended its long-standing monarchy, went through a constitutional monarchy, and transitioned to a republic system. This event drew global attention, but Nepal's politics have remained unstable since. Since 2008, 14 governments have formed, but none have completed the constitutionally guaranteed 5-year term. Every time there was a change of government, hope was short-lived, and soon after, power struggles and political instability repeated themselves. In particular, the ruling party, the Nepal Communist Party, has been criticized for showing incompetence in running the government even after coming to power. Their main failure was not addressing key economic issues, which matter most to people. Nepal still suffers from high unemployment and chronic poverty, and many young people go abroad for work or migration because they can't find stable jobs. In this situation, nostalgia for the monarchy and public support for it naturally began to draw attention. In a public opinion poll conducted in 2024, more than half of the people responded that it would be desirable for the monarchy to be restored. This was more than nostalgia. It stemmed from ongoing government changes and frustration with ineffective leaders. Nepal is now facing a clear conflict between royalists seeking the monarchy's return and communist government forces opposing them. It has become a conflict that extends beyond politics and splits society. This conflict has caused major clashes, including massive anti-government protests in Nepal in March 2025, where over 100 were injured in confrontations between protesters and police. This was more than a street protest. It was a tragedy caused by public division and government incompetence. Given this background, it's unlikely the current protest will end as a simple incident. The economy is unstable, young people are at peak dissatisfaction, and political leaders lost public trust long ago. With this structure, anti-government protests will persist and likely grow. Nepal's future depends on the government's upcoming decisions. Continued government crackdowns and oppression will only increase public anger and extend the protests. On the other hand, if the government listens to the people's voices and shows concrete changes for political reform and economic recovery, there is a possibility that the conflict could be eased. However, another important point that should not be overlooked is the fact that a significant portion of the people still view the restoration of the monarchy positively. This isn't just a minority view, it shows society's widespread dissatisfaction and expectations. If public demands keep growing over time, Nepal could potentially return to a monarchy. This situation may become a turning point in Nepal's political history, with future choices potentially leading the country in a new direction. What are your thoughts on the protests in Nepal? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching.